Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome to the Pulse podcast by Uplift Dawah. I am your host, Brother Yusuf or Samit. We have an interesting show for you today. Let's get started. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Yusuf, welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam, bro. You're going to have to show me how you did that intro thing. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. I got the connections, inshallah. How are you, bro? How's everything?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Not too bad. How are you, bro?
Alhamdulillah. I've been very interested in talking about this topic, alhamdulillah, and you are just the right person to have this discussion with. So, alhamdulillah, I'm really glad to have you on, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, akhi.
Yeah, jazakallah khair for having me as well, bro.
MashaAllah. So the topic today is atheism leads to nihilism. Inshallah, we're going to explore nihilism and try to break it down in a way that everybody can kind of understand, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem. Our hope is that simple atheists can grasp the understanding of nihilism, what nihilism is, and why atheism leads to nihilism, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem. And our brother will break it down for us, inshallah. But before we get into it, inshallah, can you just give us a little bit of introduction?
Yeah, to me or
to who you are? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yusuf. I have a YouTube channel called Pondering Soul. I'm on Twitter as @YusufPonders. And yeah, so I'm a reverted in, I think, 2014 now, so maybe 6 years ago. Alhamdulillah. I studied philosophy at university. I got my BA last year, so I just finished that. And then since then, I've just been working on trying to build my YouTube channel. Inshallah, I'm going to work at writing a book on nihilism. That's my go-to topic. And alhamdulillah. And I've been recently just offered a bit of an opportunity to work with a few of the brothers from IERA, with the Sapiens Institute that they've just launched. So I'll be writing an article and doing a webinar with them in August, inshallah. Again on nihilism.
MashaAllah. No, I look forward to that as well. And hopefully we can share that as well, inshallah, to get more people to take those courses, because we need everybody to really understand what this is. And I feel like the world is kind of leading people to that. More and more people are becoming atheists now these days, and we need to help people understand what the conclusion of atheism is, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi kareem.
Inshallah.
So to start, inshallah, let's start defining terms. What is atheism and what is nihilism?
Well, atheism is a negative position, so it denies the existence of the supernatural or of God. It varies from person to person. So some people will be more dogmatically atheist, and they'll outright claim that there is no such thing as God. They'll make the claim that they'll make positive claims along with the denial. So they'll say there is no such thing as God. God is a creation of man, so on and so forth. Yeah, so these are people that are making positive claims along with the negative claim. Then you have more agnostic atheists who just reserve judgment, or they say, there's no way of knowing whether God exists or not. And so I don't believe in him. Just because there is an absence of a certain amount of evidence that they require in order to believe in him. Nihilism is what I've come to the conclusion is the inevitable result of atheism, although not. You have to be careful to make sure that you don't say that every atheist considers themselves a nihilist, because this is a common theme that will pop up. You'll say atheism leads to nihilism, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I'm not a nihilist." It's but just whether or not atheism leads to nihilism, and you can see that is a completely different issue. There's many atheists that might feel as if their life is meaningful, but I would say this is an inconsistency with the inevitable conclusion of their beliefs that maybe they've not seen. And this is a conclusion I've come to so far, and they're welcome to try and prove it wrong, have a discussion about it. But from what I see, you can't really escape that if the human race is an insignificant part of the universe, if we are just here, and that whether or not we were here doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Whatever it is that the human race achieves or doesn't achieve in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter. The universe is clicking and ticking as in when it would do anyway, whether we happen to be floating around on this rock or not. And if the human race as a totality is insignificant, how can any single human being claim that their life has significance, or that has any sort of grand meaning? There you go. Nihilism. Ultimately life is pointless, insignificant. If there is nothing but just these random forces at play, everything is simply reducible to the material world. There is no such thing as an afterlife. There is no such thing as a God that is planning anything. There isn't any sort of underlying purpose to all of this. So that would be nihilism, the ultimate insignificance of the world. There are variations of nihilism as well. So there's the more general term, which is basically everything is meaningless. But then you have moral nihilism, epistemological nihilism, so on and so forth. So you've got different strands of it, but they're pretty much all covered in the general nihilism. If everything is insignificant, then all these certain parts of the world, or all these different bits within the exploration of knowledge, morals, etc., they're all insignificant as well. So that will be like a very general summary of atheism and nihilism in my take.
That was great. Thank you so much. Now, taking it back to your life and before you became a Muslim, did you have any experience of this type of thing?
Yeah, definitely. It's a phase, so you go in and out of it. But definitely in my teenage years, things would start to feel a bit nihilistic. You get caught up in this endless chase of pleasure, happiness. Nothing ever really managed to kind of quench that thirst. So you get a bit exhausted by it, you get a bit depressed, try something. Eventually I ended up deciding I wanted to run away and go do a bit of traveling. And that kind of put it at bay for a little bit. But I was away for about 18 months. By the time I was getting to the end of that, it was losing its effect. I was starting to feel a bit lost again, so I went home. I had this plan to save the planet. I was super eager when I got back. I was full of energy, but that only lasted for about 3 months, I think, until eventually I ended up kind of losing that motivation again and falling into nihilism, and everything just kind of felt empty, without purpose, without meaning. But it's described better as like a sort of psychological exhaustion. It wasn't necessarily because at that point, after I'd returned from traveling, I was somewhat agnostic. So I believe that there was possibly a higher power, although I was certainly not a theist by any stretch of the manner. I just thought that it was certainly possible. And but during these times of like nihilism, you start to kind of lose touch with any of that. Everything just seems equivalent to dust. Like that, there's no pleasure to be found in anything. And yeah, so I have experienced it, and it was kind of side by side with like the depression and social anxieties that we're feeling at the time as well.
And something interesting that you touched on is this could happen off and on. Even Muslims could actually face this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's pretty much anyone can. It's good. What it is generally it's you get exhausted. It can be brought upon because of an overwhelming amount of information, which we're all subject to at the moment. Everyone has access, well, not everyone, but most people have access to the internet. Whereas back in the day, you could be pretty much isolated within your community. There might have been other peoples elsewhere in the world. There might have been other religions elsewhere. But for the most part, everyone kind of lived in these closed communities where everyone sort of believed and thought the same thing. Whereas now, all of these other communities can find their way into your household, let alone within your community, because of things like the TV, because of your computers, your phones and devices. And then, for the general person, for the layman looking at all of this, it can be very overwhelming. It's not the only religion. There's something called Buddhism. There's something called Hinduism. There's something called this. There's something called that. And then, and not only do you just hear about them, but you can look into them. You can read about them. You can find out what they believe. Whereas maybe it was something you would hear in the wind, so to speak. You'd hear rumors off them, or it was fed through the lens of other people who believed the same thing as you did. So it was always painted in a particular way. Whereas now you can hear it from the horse's mouth. You can get their perspective directly from them and from everyone. And so there's so many different opinions. There's so many different ways of believing about things that it becomes a huge chore to try to figure out how you're supposed to navigate that, how you're supposed to find truth in this massive pile of mess. It becomes equivalent to kind of trying to find a needle in a haystack, and it can be very exhausting.
Appreciate that, bro. Brother Jundal asked a very good question. He says, what are some of the pitfalls atheists encounter when trying to create their own meaning of life?
Yeah, well, with regards to, for me, I've always been one that thinks creating meaning is, you can't help but feel childish when you do it. It's very much like the kids do in the playground. They're playing make-believe. There was a Vice documentary about a bunch of people. They made a community of unicorns, and they all identified as unicorns. And you watch things like that, and they're doing that. They're being very quote unquote existentialist. They're creating meaning for themselves. They are defining themselves. But it just stinks of fake. It stinks of just being hollow and empty and not really that sincere at all. It looks like they're more just kind of trying to avoid life than anything. And so I think this is pretty much the consequence of creating meaning in general. It's difficult to take it seriously because it's a product of your own creation. It's a delusion. It's something you're imposing upon the world. Whereas personally, I think true meaning isn't something created. True meaning and sincere meaning is something that's discovered in the world, something that you find, something you stumble upon, something that forces itself on you, not something that you pick. It displays itself before you, and you can't help but see it. And it's not the product of your mind. It's not a product of your creation, but it's there. And its significance is tied to the fact that it's not created by you, but that it's been discovered like a treasure. Which is the issue with this kind of existentialist way of thinking. You end up living this sort of make believe thing, which is ironic because they often accuse theists of of doing that.
It takes a lot of faith.
Yeah.
Most of the atheists that I meet, or the nihilists that I do meet, they'll say, I can create my own happiness. In fact, being a nihilist actually allows me to be free. I don't have to care about anything. If I fail a test, That doesn't really matter because I'm insignificant anyway in the grand scheme of things. And so because of that, I shouldn't worry about anything. Nothing really matters anyway. What's the point of me failing my class or getting a C- in my class when things don't really matter anyway? If my house is burned down, who cares? Sure, it affects me personally at the moment, but in the grand scheme of things, why should I stress about it after the fact when things happen?
Yeah,
what would you say about that?
I would say that when they say that, they're thinking ideally. So, they think that if something bad happens, who cares anyway? But then when the bad things happen, that's not often how they feel. They don't, if they lose someone they care about, they lose someone that's close to them. If their house burns down, if someone tries to steal something from them, these things that they said didn't matter start to matter all of a sudden. If next time someone says that to you, just say, well, can I have all your stuff then? Give me your laptop, give me your phone. None of it matters. It's all insignificant anyway. Let me have it. And be insistent about it. Push them for it. Say, no, because if you really believe this, why can't I have your stuff? And, it'll make them feel uncomfortable. Unless you come across the odd one, maybe they will. And, mashallah, you've got some stuff then. I think it's, like I say, it's more idealistic kind of thinking. They say that, but when push comes to shove, that's not how they generally tend to act. They do care. They are beings that suffer, and this freedom, the philosophers of the 20th century, the 21st century, this freedom wasn't something that was like, woo, this is really nice. It was debilitating for many of them. They they referred to it as the burden of freedom. Or they were cursed to be free. They were doomed by their freedom, because now all of a sudden they have a responsibility, and they have to sort these things out themselves. They have to try to figure their own way out in the world. And people that kind of talk about, I don't really care about exams. I don't really care about this. I don't really care about that. That generally, if when they do act like that, it gives you little motivation to even bother attempting to start these things in the first place. If it doesn't matter that you fail, it doesn't matter that you pass. So why bother going anyway? And it can kind of express itself in a multiple number of ways. One of them is, and it's very common now with young males especially, but if they get gripped by this type of mentality, they don't even bother going to university. There is this crisis at the moment where young men are not trying to go to university as much as they used to. Their numbers are dropping severely. Their engagement levels have dropped. And when they do engage, their ability to kind of pass or do well in these things, they're struggling with it. And I think this is pretty much a consequence of this kind of nihilistic mentality that's taking hold of the secular West at the moment. Is men feel very insignificant, and it's definitely the case for a lot of women as well. But there's a huge push at the moment to kind of uplift the women within our community, which mashallah is good and not necessarily a bad thing. But it's at the sort of the consequence of the neglect of a large part of the male population as well. And this brings about its own issues, its own problems, which generally kind of get overlooked a lot of the time. But men committing suicide at rates that are quite astonishing when you look at them. They suffer from a lot of things at the moment, and may Allah protect us from this kind of stuff. But I think this is all a consequence of this kind of thinking. And they might be able to paint it as a pretty picture when they're talking to you from the comfort of a nice couch in a coffee house, but when push comes to shove, it's not as great as they might be able to put it in a sentence.
I think it was William Lane Craig who said, to try and create purpose for your life or meaning for your life, when ultimately there is no meaning at all. It's equivalent to going to the street, seeing a car coming and then closing your eyes.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's because when you're trying to do it, the whole point of meaning is that it's supposed to be significant. It's supposed to grip you. But if like your underlying belief is that all meaning is pointless and insignificant anyway, there's no way of it being significant. There's no way of it gripping you in the way that it does for those who find it, who discover it, rather than quote unquote create it for themselves. And I think this is probably why you see so many people kind of turning to religion at the moment. Obviously, there is definitely a rise in atheism. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's definitely growing, and it'll continue to grow. And that's probably because in line with the fact that, populations are growing anyway in general. There's more and more people in the world. And so it makes sense that all of these groups can grow. The religious can grow as well as those who disbelievers or non-theists, anti-theists. There's plenty of room for all that growth everywhere. But yeah, it's not. I really struggle to see how you can paint it in any positive light, but they do, and I've seen it. Me and Sabor did a video not too long ago on this idea of optimistic nihilism. And the consequences of the thing that they're trying to fix, it's more general than they like to let on. So there was a little bit in that video where he's going on about every single thing that's ever happened to you doesn't really matter. Whenever anyone's been mean to you, it doesn't really matter. Any mistake you've made, it doesn't really matter. And it's like, well, you could say this to psychopaths as well. You can say this to people that want to commit evils. You can, as much as you could say it to the victim of bullying, you could say it to the bully. And there's no reason for the bully to feel bad about it. So what? It's insignificant anyway. Why not just be cruel to people? Why not just take what you want? And again, this is quite expressive in the film The Joker. If you live in a society where a lot of the people are cruel to you anyway, if you happen to be a bit of an oddball, and you find it hard to fit in, maybe you've had some bad cards dealt for you. You didn't really have the upbringing that kind of gave you the tools in order to be able to sort of deal with society and people in it in a way that they were able to kind of reciprocate, sort of good manners towards you, or to treat you well. If you feel isolated and lost and sort of neglected by society, why be good to them? Why not just take what you want, be cruel, steal, fight, and if everything's insignificant and pointless, why not? And I get fair enough when you're saying this to sort of passive, generally good-natured people. This might sound appealing to them, and you might get away kind of saying it to them. But when you're saying it, that those aren't the only kind of people in the world. Not everyone is a passive, good-natured person. This philosophy, if you want to propagate it, it's also going to be propagated to the angry, disenfranchised individual who's annoyed at the world and doesn't get anything from it, and so that there's no reason to sacrifice anything anymore for them. At least for the theist, you've constantly got this idea of no, there's eternal justice. Like it doesn't matter whether or not this society is cruel to you. You still have to be, you still have to be good. You can't become evil in response to their being evil. You can't, like for example, just because you're giving away your stuff in charity, and you're not getting anything back for it in this world, you're giving a good loan to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He'll return this to you in the afterlife. So you've still got something to look forward to. You've still got something to hope for within a atheistic / nihilistic. And just remember to keep in mind, these things aren't necessarily synonymous in the minds of all atheists. They don't necessarily see themselves as nihilistic, but in this kind of framework where there is no eternal justice, where there is no afterlife, sacrifice becomes pointless. Why give away for the sake of being quote unquote good. What does good even mean anymore? Like this is one of the biggest problems at the moment. Is like how do the atheist philosophers define good and evil? And they end up just kind of defining it as the peculiarity of a finite being that it changes over time, changes from place to place. There's no solid foundation for what good or bad is. You have a few objectivists out there. They really try to argue the case for it, but without God, I really struggle to see how you can have any sort of solid framework for an understanding of good and evil, especially if we are to be considered beings that evolved over a long period of time. Morality, reason, logic, all of these things would have evolved with us by necessity, if that's true. And if they evolved, it means they've changed over time. It means they were different back in the day to what they are now, and they'll be different in the future.
Now, in a way, what I think atheists did is they came up with this idea, or they took from religion and the infrastructure that religion had in terms of morals and ethics. And what they did is they took atheism and kind of removed God from the infrastructure that was based on God, from religion. And they took the ethics and they took the morals, but really never gave a foundation for it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, the way Nietzsche put it, in particular, he said that the morals of the religious frameworks became so embedded in the societies that they assumed that they could get rid of God, and that the morals would remain. That things would still be quote unquote intuitive. But then what happens is that none of this was necessarily self-evident at all. And he was talking specifically about the West, but this would apply just as much to, say, for example, like a Muslim nation that gave up on the idea, lost faith in God, and tried to move away from that. That all of this wasn't obvious at all. Like the religion itself was a complete package, and it stood and falls with belief in God. And if you no longer believe in God, then these things don't stand anymore. You have to justify them, and this justification turns out to be very, very difficult. A really, really, really good example of this, and I come across this on YouTube by an atheist / pagan philosopher, and it ended up causing quite a storm, and I think she's deleted her channel now since then. But she made the argument that, and forgive me for mentioning this because it is it's quite disgusting, but she was arguing that necrophilia, for example, is not immoral, and the argument was pretty sound, and the responses that she got from the YouTube community that were kind of engaging in discussion with her, they were pretty inconclusive. And so the question is if, or the premises were, if the world is nothing but material, if there is no supernatural, if there is no soul, if personhood can only really be grounded in a being while they are alive, then it means when they die, they're equivalent to an object. They're no different from the table. They're no different from the chair. They're no different from things, stones in the world, objects. You can throw them. You can do what you want with them because there's no personhood there. There's no individual to wrong anymore. They can't experience pain. They can't experience pleasure. And so when a person dies, any wrong can't be committed to them anymore because they don't exist. Whatever was them has gone. And then it moves from that, and it's like, well, okay, fair enough. The person is nothing but a collection of atoms. Maybe the wrong isn't committed to them, but there might, there's people that love them. If you do something bad to this dead person, you're going to be upsetting their family members. You're going to be upsetting, the people around them that care about them and that love them. And then you say, well, all right, but then you're saying that it's only wrong if people care for that person. but it's not inconceivable to think that there are people in the world that people don't care about. So what are you trying to say? That if someone doesn't have people that care about them, then it's not immoral to do whatever you want to this deceased individual? Because obviously if they're not much different than an object, and you can't wrong them, and there isn't anyone that cares about them, that if you were to do anything to this deceased person, they would be wronged, then it's, that there is no evil being committed here. You could also argue that, say, the person, that his family, they want to make money from selling his deceased corpse, for example, and they actively want to pass the body, or do something what we would consider quite intuitively immoral. If they're going to get enough money for that, and it's going to cause them happiness, then all of a sudden you've made it moral, especially if you're coming from like this kind of utilitarian perspective, where if they're able to get, if they're materialistic, if money makes them happy, or like if they can pay off their debts with this and so on and so forth, and relieve themselves from a lot of stress, and there happens to be some weirdo out there that's willing to pay them X amount of money for for the deceased person, then all of a sudden, because you've kind of implemented something within this kind of hypothetical that gives pleasure to the family, then it not only is it not evil, it becomes a good. SubhanAllah. And it's very difficult to get out of it. And it's like, well, where's the evil to be located? It's not in the deceased person, because they're no longer a person. You can't wrong them. If the person doesn't have family and they don't care about them, if the person can do it secretly, for example, then all of this. Where's the evil being committed? Who's being harmed? And if there is no harm, how is it to be said to be evil? And not only that, then if you've got this weird circumstance where if the family or if the people around them actively want to engage in this weird behavior, or even if he writes it in his will that this is what he wants, and that he demands that his family respect that wish, you run into these weird. And this is one example. There's a few other really weird things where, like, how do you justify in these obviously very strange and odd examples? How do you say that it's still wrong? How do you say that this is still an evil, that this still shouldn't be the case? Now, for us, it's not an issue. We believe in the soul. We believe just because the person's died, that his personhood doesn't just disappear, his or her personhood doesn't disappear, that the body is still connected to the identity of this person and should be respected as such, and so it should be dealt with accordingly. They still have rights, even though they've passed away. You still have a duty and a responsibility to make sure this person, to make sure that they look even in death. We even have the concept of the fact that they feel pain more intensely in death. So if you press too hard on the body, they'll feel the pressure much more. If you cut them, they'll feel the cut much more. This is all an integral part of our theology. We have no problem looking at these things and saying, no, this is immoral, whether or not someone cares for this person, whether or not he wrote it in his will, whether or not his family actively will, situation will be improved by such abhorrent behaviors. No matter what the situation is, for the theist, this is constantly an evil. This is constantly something that's wrong. But you detach yourself from this idea of the supernatural. You detach yourself from the eternal justice. Or if you associate with the idea that personhood only exists insofar as the person is alive, you end up with all these weird consequences. And it's very, very difficult to kind of argue your way out of that. A bit of a weird ramble there, and forgive me for that. You still there, bro?
Yeah, no, that was good. Alhamdulillah. That helped us understand a lot. There seems to be a little bit of a problem with the internet. I don't know if it's just me or, but there seems to be just a little bit of a problem.
With atheism, yeah, there's.
No, your connection. There's a little bit of a issue with the connection for some reason. I'm not sure.
Oh, 1 second.
Let us know, guys, inshallah, in the comments if
Did
everything's
you
okay.
tell me you heard that ramble? Because I was on a.
Yeah. We heard it, alhamdulillah. It was going in and out just a little bit, but I caught most of it, alhamdulillah.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
So yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy, it seems like, but alhamdulillah, I think
1 sec. I'll drop out. I'll jump back in. I'll see that.
okay, sounds good, inshallah. Ikhwani, jazakallahu khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you guys, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from this. Make sure you are sharing this on all of your platforms. Allow people to come and really benefit from this and listen to this, inshallah, because there are a lot of people who are thinking about becoming an atheist, or some people who are an atheist but really don't understand the realities of atheism and what it leads to. So we want all of them to benefit. Please do share, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So the next question that I have for you, Akhi, and you touched on this a lot. If the universe came from a blind, purposeless forces that began from a bang and it will eventually end, as they say, with a collapse, can those who are products of that purposeless explosion claim to have an objective purpose, and why?
Well, this is the thing. Objective is a weird word. A lasting purpose or a significant purpose, I would say no. They can feel purpose. The evil man can feel purpose. The baddie in the movie, his life is very meaningful when he wants to go out and crush the world. When he wants to see everything burn, he wants to destroy it. That becomes a purpose for him, and he might be consumed by this purpose. He might feel it. It might be very profound for him. So they can, and you can look at this and say, well, yeah, it's objectively the case. This man he feels purpose. Look at him; he's so driven, he's so motivated by this desire to see the world be crippled, and. Objective just means that you can look at it, you can find it and observe it in the world. So you can use this language to say, yes, there are atheists, there are people out there that are experiencing meaning, that they're experiencing purpose. Whether or not they're experiencing it, I would argue is more in line with the fact that we have an intuitive drive, and we understand that we are meaningful beings. We understand that we have a significance. That we when we're engaging with the world, we're wired to know that it matters. That there's a purpose behind it. It takes a lot of being overwhelmed. It takes a lot of information to cripple the human being into thinking that they're without purpose. It takes something to happen for that to occur. This isn't something that you find within our nature. This isn't something you find within our being. There was a study done by Paul Bloom. We read recently on Muslim Twitter Discourse server as part of this reading club we're doing. And this essay basically was pointing out that children, they're born with belief in the supernatural, with belief in a higher power, with belief that that there is an overriding purpose to all things. And I would correlate this with the fitra, and I would say the atheist still has a fitra, the nihilist still has a fitra. And so when people are engaging with the world and they're experiencing things meaningfully, it's because they are meaningful beings. I would say it is a fact that they are significant. I would say it is a fact that they should be feeling meaning, because meaning is there to be found. What my argument is that it's not. It doesn't follow from atheism, though. If you accept atheistic axioms, if you accept nihilistic axioms, a significant life and the feeling of meaning it doesn't follow from that. It becomes absurd, and you have the development of philosophical thought surrounding this idea of the absurd, this idea of absolute meaninglessness, and that it basically ends up expressing itself as a sort of cognitive dissonance. They feel meaning in life, they feel significance. They see it in other things. They come across it. They're experiencing it. They're finding it. They're not necessarily because even people who are quote unquote creating meaning, they're still discovering it in the world. They still find it. They still see things that strike them. It's very meaningful. But I would say that's because we're wired to do so. It's a part of our. It's built into us to spot it when we see it. We're pattern recognition machines. We're, it's within us, and this follows from this concept of the fitra. This follows from the idea that you look all over the planet, everywhere you go. There's this constant theme of the supernatural. You have these isolated communities, in the Americas, in China, in Africa, in like Northern Europe, and all of them are all believing in the supernatural. They have differing degrees in terms of their theology, in terms of the major beliefs. Say some of them may be pagan, some of them may be polytheistic, some of them monotheistic. But I would say that you can always kind of locate monotheism in all of them, and you can explain the paganism and you can explain the polytheism as creative adaptations or creative expressions that kind of change and develop over a time. Because even when you look at Hinduism, you see this idea of the first creator, this eternal being, and then all these other quote unquote gods that they have within their system are things that have beginnings, things that were themselves created, and you still have this eternal thing, giving rise to all of this. You look at there's some really good videos done with Brother Jerry on epistemics. I think it was Brother Imran from IERA, and they did this on the history of monotheism. And then you don't even need to watch them podcasts. You can just look into the religions yourself, and you'll see traces of monotheism there. You can see this development, and so it seems clear to me that that this is a common trend for the human being in general, regardless of where they are on the planet. That there is this fitra, and that it expresses itself with a belief in the supernatural, or I would say an awareness of the supernatural. But because of the nature of the supernatural, because of the fact that it's supposed to be a transcendent reality, that it's not to be found quote unquote empirically on the earth, it becomes difficult to prove it empirically, because it is by definition it's not empirical. When people, like for example, when the atheist demands that you find the give me the evidence for God, it's like, well, what evidence are you expecting to find exactly? And they end up sounding like an NPC computer game character demanding you show the game developer in the game. And it's like, in World of Warcraft, you got these little characters running around, and they're like, show me the evidence for the game developer. Show me where, but the limits for my evidence is that you have to be able to show it me in this game. And it's like, well, the entire game itself is like evidence for something that's made it. And I need you to kind of transcend the game. I need you to understand that which is, above and beyond it. It's not going to be encapsulated in it. You're not going to find the painter in the painting. You need to think beyond that. And it's the same with this, this earth, this universe, this reality. You need to think beyond the empirical. You need to think that which transcends it. And then obviously the arguments for the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather than this infinite regress of dependencies. That would be absurd, and that the being that gives rise to them all itself has to be one, has to be eternal, that which is itself independent, doesn't rely on anything. And the arguments are there, the evidence is there. You can reason, you can look at the world and infer intelligence everywhere. Everywhere you see life. One thing I was often struck by when I was younger, I remember staring in the mirror into the darkness of my pupils and being really, really freaked out that I was a thing that was alive, and trying to grapple with what, and then being weirded out by my hands, and the process of commanding a hand to open and close. How, like, I don't have to go open, close, open. It's not like I have to, when if I'm pulling levers and things like that to make this machine work, it just does it. Like I couldn't get my head around it. It was so weird. And life is like that. Life is awe-inspiring. Life is just absolutely mental. And subhanallah, it's enough to awaken the fitrah. It's enough for you to be able to infer intelligence and this designer, this being that sustains it all, that gives that everything depends upon. Subhanallah, it's
that's amazing. Earlier you touched on something very important, Akhi, something we understand to be the fitrah. But for an atheist, what would you say to an atheist who claims that what we call the fitrah is simply just a product of evolution?
A product of evolution.
The reason why we know all of these things, the reasons why we feel things and we sense things and we appreciate things, all of these are just simply from just a product of evolution.
Well, I would ask, why is it the case that this only seems to have occurred with the human being? I would ask, why is it the case that this happens to have made the human being the most successful species on the planet? And then I would also ask, well, if this is the case, that this idea of the supernatural, of this idea of this fitrah being something that just kind of developed via evolution, they would have to concede to this idea that, well, what that means for the atheist, if this is true, if it did develop through that, that you can't trust your cognitive capacities at all, because what happens to have given rise to the most successful species is the biggest lie ever. The fact that there's this supernatural that has led to the most successful species, the biggest lie. If it's the biggest lie ever, then that means evolution isn't truth driven. And if evolution isn't truth driven, how are they so sure that they're able to deductively reason that evolution occurred at all? Their ability to be able to establish that evolution has occurred completely relies upon the fact that the cognitive faculties are reliable, that they're able to establish truth using reason, using empirical evidence. But they're using their reason, they're using their ability to perceive the world in a way that undermines the very fact that they even have access to truth. Because they have to concede that if the supernatural is the biggest lie ever, and that is the thing that gave rise to the most successful species on the planet that has ever existed, and in a way it's been able to dominate the planet like nothing has ever dominated it before. You walk in a city and it is not like anything that you find in nature. Like, they're distinct things. I walk around Manchester and I'm struck by the fact that no matter where I look, apart from the sky, everything is man-made. Everything is built by the human being. We're living in a world of quote unquote of our own creation. Obviously, the creation is one that's reliant upon things that are already existing, but we manipulate our environments in ways that it's never been done before. We're a very impressive species, and this seems to suggest that we do have reliable cognitive faculties. But if the fact that religion is the thing that gave rise to this success, if all of that was a lie, how how is it not that just this whole process is simply just pragmatic, and that we can't make any of these claims about the truth of where the fitrah came from, for example, is The claim undermines itself. It makes it very difficult to be able to explain like how you can be so sure that that's the case. Because if it's true, then you can't rely on the faculties that gave rise to that conclusion in the first place. It's very bizarre.
Subhanallah. That's well put, Akhi. If you're questioning the very faculties that you're using to judge, to come with that judgment, those very faculties are questionable themselves. And so how do you believe the very question that you actually brought up? That's very interesting. Taking you back to morals. I forgot which lady philosopher that actually said this, but if there is no God and there is no immortality, then the best quality that a human being should have is selfishness. If ultimately we're all doomed to die, and we're all doomed to die, and death is waiting for us at the end of this track with open arms, then YOLO, you have one life to live. Live it the best way you can by being selfish. Why should you care about other people? Why should you take care of other people if there is no reward at the end, in another life? If this is it, why should you care at all? What would you say to that?
Well, I guess maybe the atheist that doesn't want to believe that might say, but it's nice when we live in a world where people do good things for you. But yeah, that's true only if other people are doing it. If it turns out that most people the opportunity, why shouldn't you be selfish also? Am I still here? Was the connection being lost?
The connection is being lost a little bit.
I'll jump in again. I don't know what's up. Sorry.
Okay, that'd be great, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Brothers and sisters, if you have any questions, inshallah, make sure you comment. Jazakallah khair. Brother Jundullah, welcome. Samadi, Bilal, Salman Al-Ansari, Mukit Khan, Grey Wolf, Barakallah Feek for being here. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions for our brother, inshallah, make sure you comment and I will ask him. Make sure you share with your platforms as well, so other people can benefit. Jazakallah khair, Barakallah Feek. Go ahead, Akhi. Jazakallah khair.
So this whole idea of being nice to people is only working if you live in a society where everyone's already agreed to this. Everyone already wants to be nice. The issue here is that sometimes you really need to convince people this is the case. They should be like that. Now, if your population is rather young, and if they are very materialistically driven, and it's very, very rare that you come across young people that are like this, that are generally they're not selfish. When I was growing up, and I went to a secular school, religion wasn't a common thing. It was more mocked than anything. We had a religious studies class, and the teacher was one who was bullied. We would ruin her classroom. We treated her with disrespect. And I know that this was a common theme, not just in the class that I was in, but it was well known that every year did this, that she was just not a teacher that was respected. And it wasn't just her, the religious studies teacher. There was this disrespect that you find in other classes. And this is a problem with a lot of public schools, especially in the UK. And I know there's a massive problem in the US as well, with public schooling, with children taking drugs and alcohol into school. There's some schools in the UK as well that ended up with metal detectors going in, and I think this is probably the case in the US as well. It's the youth in the secular world that can be quite scary, and they can be very selfish. That it doesn't seem to be giving rise to this super generous group of people. You look at who's giving most charity. It's the religious communities. It's not the atheist community. You might be able to guilt trip them, in certain parts, or once a year. Yeah, you make Red Nose Day events, and you'll get them to maybe send a $5 collectively, and it looks impressive on that one day. But you don't see them giving charity out of every paycheck that they get. A common phrase that pretty much every secular household has probably heard is charity starts at home. And there's I don't see a secular world becoming one that's more generous. I see it being one that you have to force generosity through taxation, and then you have to kind of guilt trip them in it. It's like, oh well, if the taxing was this amount of money, then you end up kind of expecting the government to have to deal and do all of this quote unquote charity for you, but then you don't really feel like it's you that's done it. You feel like they're taking your money. And you won't. The common thing that laymen always talk about, when the government take their money, they don't think of the government taking their money to do good things with them. They always associate it with them. Oh, they're robbing us, and they're just flying around in jets and fancy cars. Like the laymen always perceive the government spending the money that they've been taxed badly. They always perceive their money being wasted. And the charity that gets done, it's never expressed, or it's very rare that they see it as a deed that they've done. It feels very disconnected from you. I don't really feel like the charity that my government do is a consequence of my goodwill. I don't feel like I deserve praise for the charity that the government have performed in the third world, for example. And I would be very weirded out if someone came up to me and was like, oh, Yusuf, thank you. Your government gave us a massive assistance package a few years back, and it really helped the community in this particular country, and we've really benefited from that. And I just wanted to thank you personally. It's like I'd be weirded out if someone said that to me. It's like, well, is it me you should be thanking? I don't know. I don't feel like I was involved in that at all. Like I didn't even see that money. It was just taken out. I didn't even know it was being spent on you guys. I had absolutely no idea. I don't feel like I deserve any praise for that. But then you have these issues where I think they so that this idea of being selfish seems to me to be a common theme in secular society. You kind of have to force the charity on them and guilt trip them into it. But the layman generally, I really do think that they see charity as something that starts at home, and
okay. The reality is that this idea of nihilism seems like a hopeless ideology, and many people might have reached this point simply because of the epistemic path that they followed. Couldn't they just step back a little bit and look at other epistemic paths that might lead them to a more hopeful ideology?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe Islam or something like that.
Yeah.
And why do you think Islam has something to offer them, and why do you think that maybe by stepping back and looking at Islam from a different lens, this would help them actually make more sense and gain a more hopeful ideology?
Well, first of all, the thing with people that have been raised in secular societies and the atheist that kind of lives and is embodied and surrounded by this, they've grown up in a world that has constantly mocked religion and really pushed into their heads that the religious person is this crazy nut that stands on the street corner with a Bible screaming verses at everyone, and they look crazy, they sound crazy. This is the religious person. It's very for people growing up, the teenager, the young adult, they, for the most part, if they've grown up around mostly non-religious people, and even religious people these days can be indistinguishable from non-religious in many places, then it's hard for that person to take religion seriously. And what that person needs to do is they need to understand that the reason that they don't take religion seriously is ironically the same reason that they think that people that do take religious seriously do. They've been conditioned. And it's not to say that religious people that grow up in a religious environment aren't conditioned. They are. But it's this idea that being conditioned is necessarily a bad thing. Well, it depends. What are you being conditioned into? And is the person in the secular society free from that? Are they free from conditioning? Is it a coincidence that you're an atheist and everyone around you happens to be non-believing seculars? Is it, you might ridicule, say, someone who was born into a Muslim family and they were raised Muslim and say, you're only a believer because you were born into that religion. You're only a believer because your parents told you to be so, despite the Quran mentioning explicitly, don't just follow that. It ridicules that the Quran literally takes the mick out of people. That it's probably not the best way of putting it. It points out to the absurdity of people who only believe because their family believe, who only believe because that's what they found their forefathers doing. It repeatedly says this. Don't believe just because your forefathers believe. Believe because it's true. Believe because you've been guided. You've looked. You've tried to establish truth. You've took life seriously. You've took the options seriously. Now, Islam is a legitimate option, and people need to be able to kind of get themselves out of this secular conditioning, this atheistic conditioning. This when you're watching the TV, you're watching things like the Monty Python, where the life of Brian, the whole religious idea is completely made into a mockery. The whole film is just turning religion into a joke, and that's just one example out of many. And this does affect the mind of the children that grow up in this world when they're watching these things. It makes them hard to take religion seriously. And for those of you, if you recognize yourself as this, if you recognize you're someone that's grown up in a secular society, everyone around you has, been someone that has never really taken religion seriously, then question, am I really not religious because it's a legitimate position? Or is it because of the fact that I happen to have grown up in a world where this is the norm? Where this is a standard default position, where everyone seems to be non-believers, where everyone doesn't really take religion that seriously, where mocking it is constantly and openly done. Question. Don't just point at the Muslim. Don't just point at the Hindu. Don't just point at the Christian, who are sincere believers, and ridicule them as if you're free from that, as if you weren't conditioned, as if you weren't molded as a child. Think about it, look into it, and then once you realize maybe you are a victim of the thing that you think everyone else is victim of, when you come to that conclusion, when you come to that realization, then you have to start taking these other things seriously. You have to take Christianity seriously. You have to take Hinduism seriously. You have to take Islam seriously, and you need to evaluate these positions. Now, does it mean you have to look into absolutely every religion? No. You can start with the fundamental principles. You can start by asking, well, rather than looking into every religion, I'll try to narrow it down a bit. What makes more sense? Is there or is there not a God? You ask that question and you try to answer it. Once you've established that, then you move on to the next. Well, for the sake of argument, and I can't be too long because I'm going to need to go soon. But once you've, say, for example, you've looked into it and you've established that there is a supernatural, there is a higher power, there is a creative force that is sustaining the world and that the world depends upon. Then the question is, as well, is that being one? Is it characterized by monotheism? Is it multiple? I.e., is it characterized by polytheism, or is it something like paganism? Is the universe itself God? You can ask these questions, and depending on the answers that you find here, you can write off many religions. Now, if it turns out that polytheism is absurd, you don't need to look into all the polytheistic religions. If it turns out that paganism or pantheism is absurd, then you don't need to look into all of them. Now, my argument is that Tawheed, or the oneness of God, is the most the rational out of all of them. It doesn't make sense that the creative force is anything but an eternal being that is self-sustaining, that doesn't rely upon anything, that is the source of all power, and nothing competes with it. When you're looking at all of these polytheistic religions, they're all dependent on something. So why worship the things that are dependent? Why not worship the thing that they all rely upon? And again, this ties back to this monotheistic root that you find in pretty much every religion. There's this sense of an eternal creator that gives rise to everything. Now, if it turns out that monotheism is more rational, and there are many videos that cover this in depth. There's one on, I think the channel's called Basira Project. A friend of mine has done a course called The Evidences. Inshallah, maybe I'll post it as a comment, the playlist on here. It's by a brother called Sharif. He goes through this process of kind of going through the evidences of that. And it's not just him that does this. There's many videos. The book Divine Reality by Brother Hamza Zortzis does a really, really good job at dismantling atheism and making a case for Islam. And I could go on forever with all these different resources you could use to kind of lead you in this direction. But the point is that you don't have to look into every religion. You can look into the foundational principles. I really do believe that once you've done that, you can lead yourself to the idea that monotheism is the truest option out of the ones that are available. Once you've established that, then there's only really three options there. Is it Judaism, is it Christianity, or is it Islam? For me, it was a really easy choice out of the three of them. I believe that Jesus, alayhi salam, was a real person. And I think when you look into the life of Jesus, alayhi salam, it was quite evident that he was a good person and he was significant, and his life wasn't one that was just random. He wasn't just this odd guy. He wasn't crazy. There was, there's a sense about Jesus alayhi salam that he was a very important character, and he shaped the world. Now, there's the three different religions. What do they each say about him? The first one say that he was a criminal. They say that he was a liar. They say that he was deceived. A'udhu billah. And that just doesn't seem to fit. If you sincerely look into it, Jesus alayhi salam, it does not seem to be someone who was a dishonest liar, who was a charlatan. So that just writes off Judaism for me. Then you look at the Christians. What do they say about him? They say he was God. Well, this is absurd for me, because when you look into the Christian religion, I can't help but see the complete opposite. I can't help but see a man who worshipped his creator, who saw God as one being, who the devil would try to tempt him. But the devil, within the biblical narrative, knew who God was. What has the devil got to offer God? Why would the devil waste time following God in the desert, trying to promise God the world, trying to promise God everything, if God is the owner of everything? God, the shaitan devil, Iblis, Lucifer, he, in the Christian narrative, was present in the council of angels, and he was aware of God. He doesn't have to believe. He knows God exists. And if he knows God exists, he knows there's nothing he can offer to God. He says, I'm gonna lead mankind astray. That's what's he doing here with Jesus in the desert, trying to lead him astray. He's trying to lead a man astray. And you see the bit where he's on the cross and he's like, God, why have you forsaken me? Like, the Bible, you go through it, it just screams that this man was a man, and he was a special man. He was a man who had communication with his creator, and he was a prophet. And so the Christian narrative just falls apart. What's left then? All you've got at that point is Islam. What does Islam see Jesus alayhi salam as? As a prophet, as a messenger of God, as a good man, as an example, as someone that that you can follow, as someone that worships the one who made him. And subhanallah, that's one method of kind of being led to Islam. And I really think if you're sincere about your position, you really question as to whether or not you are someone who's been conditioned into atheism. Have you been conditioned into secularization? Have you been conditioned into not taking religion seriously? And I'm not just telling you to only take Islam seriously here. In order to find the truth, you need to take it all seriously. You need to, you can't go around mocking the Christians. You can't mock the Jews. You can't mock the Hindus. If once you kind of get into this position where you understand that, you don't really know the answer yet, you have to make effort to search for it. You can't just assume your position. This goes as much for the theist. This goes as much for the Muslim. You can't just have blind faith. You need to establish a foundation. You need to establish a grounding. The Muslim, they're required to look into and establish a solid aqidah, just as much as this is upon us all. We need to search for truth and understand why we believe what we believe. Not just blindly follow the things we found our forefathers following, as the Quran constantly reminds us to do. That would be my call. Take it seriously, look into it. Inshallah, if you do so sincerely, I really do believe that you will be led to Islam as a genuine path of truth and salvation. And from that, you will gain your sense of significance back, that which atheism takes away from you. You will understand that, quote unquote, freedom is more complex than simply having it. That being free to do certain things closes down other things. If I am free to take heroin, that leads to me eventually being enslaved by the thing that I had a freedom to do. And once I'm enslaved by heroin, I'm no longer free to do many other things. When I become free to drink alcohol every weekend, my life can, it doesn't necessarily follow that it will, but it can be dominated by that. And once it is dominated by that, I'm no longer free to do other things, because all of my attention, I only have a limited amount of hours in a day. I only have a limited amount of time. And too much freedom is stunting. It becomes difficult to figure out what it is exactly you're going to do with your life. And picking one thing closes off other things. So freedom, ironically, is it can be quite enslaving. And and so they need to think about these things. They need to ponder on them.
I think you've given us a clear epistemic path for all of those who want to look into a more hopeful, more realistic ideology or religion. Even I think Islam kind of provides people with that foundation and gives them true hope, not just false hope, but actual real hope. And I thank you for that.
They can discover something, they can find it, and it's not something they have created. It's something that's been created for them.
That's right.
Subhanallah. If you sincerely find it, and I hope you do, I will keep you all in my du'as. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all on the straight path.
Allahumma ameen. And this goes for all of our brothers and sisters who claim to be atheists. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them. And we hope that they do take a look at other options that are out there without limiting their perspective to one thing and then running with that and saying everything else is actually wrong. Rather, take the time to actually review what else is out there. And if you think about what our brother Yusuf has taught us today and showed us, you will find that Islam gives you that pathway that is full of hope. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide all of us. Akhi, jazakallahu khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. We went over the time that we wanted to. I'm sorry about that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in your scale on the day of judgment, inshallah. But we benefited a lot. And I know there are a lot of questions still to ask. There are a lot of areas to still explore. So inshallah, maybe hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Inshallah. Yeah, man.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, akhi, and we'll catch up soon.
Inshallah. Make sure those of you who followed me to this channel from my social media, make sure you subscribe to Uplift Dawah, inshallah. And those of you from Uplift Dawah, make sure you subscribe to my channel, Pondering Soul.
Where do they find you? That's it.
Yeah, Pondering Soul is on YouTube. So if you just search Pondering Soul, you'll find me there. Or Yusuf Ponders, I think, probably gives rise to my channel as well. My Twitter, @Yusuf Ponders. Instagram, @Yusuf Pondering. I'll tell you what, brother, I'll send you my social media links and my website as well, ponderingsoul.blog. I'll send it to you in a message. If you could pop that in the description.
That'd be great.
But yeah, and I think it's probably good that you plug your Twitter and stuff in now as well, because I think a few of the people have come from like the Discord server that I'm on and my Twitter.
Oh, great. So you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, all of them at Uplift Dawah ORG. Uplift Dawah ORG. So youtube.com/Uplift Dawah ORG. Same with Instagram and Twitter. All of them with the same tag. Inshallah, bidnillah kareem. Jazakallah khair for all of you being here, inshallah. We will do it again soon and cover most of the things that you wanted to ask, inshallah, bidnillah kareem. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And to our brothers and sisters, make sure you share this, inshallah, bidnillah kareem. Barakallahu feek. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.